In today's talk, I want to share my purpose through my own journey, both on a personal and professional level. The idea is for you to feel inspired and see every measure of life through a positive lens and find a way to work out your story and narrative through a brighter light. My name is Rola Chami, and this is my Oxford Talk. When was the last time you sat down with yourself to ask, how has my present moment been shaped by my past? And what am I now paving to shape my future? I am a firm believer that everything that happens to you, good or bad, small or big, has an impact on you in one way or another, and it shapes your journey. It is up to you to make the most out of it and give it the narrative you want, and this is how your purpose is born. You see, my purpose and story begins from a very young age. Growing up in Norway, we were taught to always look after others, care for them, and be kind. Growing up in a Middle Eastern household, I was taught the same, and more so through our faith and culture. So in short, being kind, do good, and be good was deeply rooted in my value from a very young age. I always knew I was born to make a difference. I was different among my friends growing up. I was different within my family. Some may say I had a bit of an identity crisis when I was younger. When I left my family to go and study abroad, it was the first time in my life that I decided to be who I am meant to be. I started with pronouncing my name the correct way when I introduced myself, and it's Rola. And then to pursuing my purpose, which I knew was to always, in any big or small way, help others. My focus was always women and children. They've always been at the center of my purpose. Women are underrepresented in most societies, both on a political and economic level, while children are the future. When I was 15, I had an English teacher who I sat with and said, "I don't like these books we are required to read. They do not draw me in, and my attention is mostly lost. All I want to do is read the first chapter and the last chapter just to make you believe that I've read the book." Her response was to question me and ask me what my interests were. She told me about a book called Behind Closed Doors, a book about a woman who had been abused from a young age into her adulthood and how she overcame it. This book in particular paved my purpose. I continued educating myself by reading books based on true stories of women and men subjected to abuse, and then to women facing societal challenges in the Middle East and the North African region, through my studies and through my early career, which was in the humanitarian field. While I was at university, I made a friend who eventually opened up to me to tell me a very vulnerable story about her relationship with an abusive partner. That to me was a turning point on a few counts. One, I had read all these books and done all this research about women in abusive relationships. It was now becoming real. Two, I had to pull all my learning into practice and help her. It was my natural instinct to immediately help her. In this case, I found it easy to say, leave him, move on. This was just the tip of the iceberg, you see. She had more restraints than just fear of leaving. It was by society, it was the family, and the culture to think about too. This story will make sense to you in a short while. While I was working in the Middle East, my focus was on advocating more rights to women and marginalized communities. We worked on ensuring that women got a seat on the table where decisions were made. There, I conducted research on women and their rights in the region. I found myself drawn to women who were subject to domestic abuse, you see. I was shocked at how many women didn't identify it as domestic abuse, and others who knew it wasn't right, but had families to think about, and culture again, and society. Women who knew they wanted to leave couldn't due to financial restraints and fear of losing their children. You see, in most communities in the region, women are at home looking after the children and their families, while the men are the ones who come in with the income. If they were to think to leave, they couldn't support their children, and therefore the man gets the right to look after the kids. You see, in a larger context, 1 in 4 women are subjected to domestic abuse worldwide. That's a very big number. Women subjected to abuse go back on average up to 5 times to their abuser, and by the 5th and beyond, you end up more likely dead. You see, there was a shift in my career after working in the Middle East. I had to move to Dubai due to certain political matters. I find it hard to cope with the changes in my environment. You see, from living in a war zone area and refugee camps to now living in a very polished city like Dubai, I started making bracelets. It helped me deal with a lot of the changes in my environment, but also my mental health, you see. I found out that I got a lot of requests about these bracelets, and I decided to sell it. And instead of taking profit to myself, I decided to create a social enterprise / a charity, but more so to talk about abuse while women bought these bracelets. I have always been blessed with knowing I love to talk, so why not talk about this topic, although it's seen as a taboo in the region? This was the moment Survive for Women was born, a charity that made handmade bracelets sold with 100% profit to go towards women that I personally knew who needed the financial support in the region. While my purpose was center stage in my life, I found myself suddenly in a very difficult position, where after all my work advocating for women's rights, especially those in abusive relationships, I suddenly found myself in one too. Not the kind that you could see, but the one that was hidden. It reminded me of that friend I told you about earlier at university and how easy it was for me to tell her just leave. But it made me realize how hard it really is, in fact. It's easy for those of us looking on the outside in, but much harder for us to be on the inside looking out. As well educated as I was on this topic, it took me a year to identify it because while I was in it, I made excuses for it too. While I was living it, I was scared. Scared of the person, scared of the unknown, society, culture, and everything that I've mentioned earlier as well. However, I continued advocating and kept my purpose in the center. But in 2021, I refocused my purpose and decided to focus on my career by growing and moving upwards and forwards. This meant that I had to be more strategic with my approach as to what that would look like and how this would and could support my future. A year later, I took the decision to terminate Survive for Women after 10 years of advocating for women in the Middle East, which I continued to do through my speaking engagements. But it was time to focus on the bigger picture, children and education. The idea is to create an institution which cares for refugee children who have lost both parents in armed conflict and which might draw on supporting from charitable foundations in the Gulf and corporate sponsors. I am in the very early days of working out how I might achieve this one day. However, there are studies that show that the first 1,000 days of a child's education is the most important part of their development, and this is where the big impact comes in. I can only hope that as we grow and our purpose shifts, we as humans continue to embrace our blessings and give back to our communities, people, and beyond. We have more power than we think, and with small gestures, you can see how big the impact can be. In 2012, I went to Al-Zatari refugee camp. That camp was the first one to be set up for the civil war that was happening in Syria. I met a girl there who was very angry, and when I spoke to her and asked her why, she said, "The boys have footballs and we don't." And to put this in context for you, there was a tent for boys and there was a tent for girls, and the boys had footballs and the girls didn't. And I very much agreed with her. So I told her, I will get you some footballs. I had to leave Jordan and I went to Dubai and I started a fundraiser there. While I got the footballs, I sent them directly to her name so that she can decide what she really wanted to do with those footballs. Fast forward, I came back to the UK and I sat down with a colleague. He asked me about what I did for the footballs and how I got them. He told me about how he worked with a football foundation based in the UK, who had set up a lot of football pitches only for girls in that same camp. When I asked why, he said it was because of one girl who had been given some footballs. And so now this is a very good example of how a small gesture can have a very big impact on someone's life. I will leave you with this. Give yourself the time, space, and peace that can support you and reset your purpose, and let that drive you towards your greatness. Thank you.